Boston College is sitting at 4-2, but how well are they really playing? We're going to dive into some numbers on today's show.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Locked On Boston College, your team every day. I'm your host, AJ Black. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get yourself started. Now, we have a midweek game this week, a Thursday night game against Virginia Tech, but we are, it's an interesting spot where Boston College is at right now, 4-2, and they've played well, but they also have struggled at times. And no better person to get us into the nitty-gritty of what BC is doing well and what they aren't doing well based on the numbers than Parker Fleming of Stats of War. Parker, how's it going?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk Boston College. I know we did this last year, and I'm glad to be back again this year.
And of course, we have Mitchell on here, Mitch Wolf of Eagle Insider, who's on here a couple times a week, and numbers are Mitch's jam too. So, Mitch, I'll let you kick this one off.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have Parker back and discuss this team because it's very different than last year's team in a lot of ways. But the first thing that I want to talk about, Parker, is one of the stats that you really focus on is the Eckel ratio. And I know we talked about this last year, but every comic book is somebody's first. So I was going to ask you to kind of give that definition again, and then we can kind of talk about where BC is on both offensive and defensive side of the ball with that statistic.
Yeah, so the elevator pitch for the Eckel rate is really, really straightforward. It's just a better measure of kind of game control or drive productivity than time of possession. Coaches fixate on time of possession, and at the extremes, time of possession can tell you a lot about a game, but Eckel's trying to answer the question, what did you do with the drives you had? How many quality possessions did you have as defined by a first down inside the 40-yard line, which is kind of the tipping point, more or less, of when it's more likely that you score on the drive than you don't on average historically. And so what the Eckel's named after a Navy fullback, shout out to Alex Kirshner, who called my attention to the longest drive in college football history. I think 2006 Navy Emerald Bowl. He was the fullback on that team. So just picked the random name because I liked it there. But basically it just kind of says three things. One, the rate is how often you are allowing or generating a quality possession. The ratio is what proportion of the quality possessions in a game are yours. So that's really the game control, time of possession substitute. And then points per Eckel is telling you, how efficient are you when the field shortens up, when you get into the scoring opportunities. It's a little bit analogous to like red zone scoring, but again, more so, hey, when the game script flips positive, how well are you capitalizing on that? So Boston College is 103rd in Eckel ratio. 41.9% of all quality possessions in their games have been theirs. That's not great. Obviously, that kind of says on average, they're not controlling the games because other teams are generating more quality possessions than they are generating. On offense, they're 103rd at 34.6, but they're 20th in points per quality possession, averaging 4.2. Some of that is explosives. You don't generate a lot of quality possessions, so your only quality possessions are big play touchdowns. But some of that is they are legitimately doing pretty okay in those short field situations. I do some regularization and padding to kind of, dampen those outliers a little bit. So there is some signal there. On defense, Boston College is 98th in Eckel rate at 48.1%. Allowed, but they are 4th in points per quality possession. So both sides of the ball, the generation of those quality possessions is pretty poor for Boston College, but finishing those drives and the defense preventing those finishing drives is really, really good. So maybe some signs that things are going in the right direction. They're able to tighten the screws a little bit, bend but don't break on defense, and kind of finish those drives on offense, but not generating enough quality possessions and allowing far too many of them on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, so that was something that I was interested in this year because last year, to bring it back to kind of a more basic stat, BC was second to last in red zone efficiency and dead last in the Power 5 in that measure, 81.4% touchdown per red zone drive. And then this year, they're second best behind Texas and tie with Ole Miss. So I was kind of like, that's a huge change. And so my next question is because last year the two best red zone efficiency defenses were UCLA and Kansas State at 38.5% and 39.4%. And BC's at 25% right now. So I don't think that's sustainable long term, but is there any of this that can be sustainable from a statistical standpoint?
Yeah, I think the rate is certainly more sticky than the red zone issues, especially when we're talking about the quality of a team. Don't let me get too nerdy here, but there's a little bit of a data leak problem. So take it to extremes. One, Texas, who's the best offense in the nation, pretty aside from a couple drives at the beginning versus Oklahoma there, and then take Kennesaw State, who just jumped up and is not, doing amazing. There are a lot of red zone drives that Kennesaw State would have failed to score on, but we didn't observe them because their offense is not good enough to get in those situations, right? So Kennesaw State is not getting into the red zone often enough for us to get negative metrics on them as well. So, and on the other hand, Texas is facing more red zone drives than most teams would. And so their rate might be a little bit down just because they had so many more opportunities. And so that's what you have to keep in mind with stats like this. That's why I like the echo rate and the points per echo a little bit more than the red zone is. It incorporates more of the field. You have more opportunities. And then I do some statistical regularization on that to kind of account for the fact that really good offenses are going to face a lot of attempts and really bad offenses are not going to face as many attempts. So not to sound the alarm on Boston College, I think they would trend a little bit more towards fewer opportunities means that we might be overvaluing their red zone scoring ability just because there's a lot of opportunities that we think they would not capitalize on if they had gotten to the red zone.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I thought because I was like, I don't think. And not that they've gotten lucky in the red zone of too much in terms of on defense. Really, that's the one that I'm focusing on, just because they've allowed, like you said, like they are allowing a lot of possessions into that area. I don't think they have any red zone turnovers forced, but I think they're second in the country in opponent field goals attempted behind Florida State, ironically enough. So. And then to flip it, BC is tied for, I think, the third fewest field goals. They've only attempted one field goal this year, and they made it. So they're just. We'll talk about special teams in a little bit, but special teams is definitely not BC specialty.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Boston College also has a recipe for, an excellent red zone offense in a legitimate dual threat quarterback. Like Castellanos changes the gravity of what defenses have to do. You get plus numbers there. And so I think there is some absolute signal to them being, a little bit better than average. There's some football reasons to believe that, hey, there's some sustainability in that red zone scoring, even if they're not generating those opportunities a lot and they're not really playing super great between the 20s, as it were.
Okay.
In a moment, we're going to just continue our conversation with Parker Fleming, get into some more statistics around Boston College, look at where they're playing well and where they're not, and do a whole lot more of that in just a moment. Hey, Boston College fans, it's time to recognize the Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we've pooled over $10,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits lead to massive change. With the Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go to the specific player you choose. Unlike collectives, you know exactly where your support is going, and you can even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates after the season. The best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. This week, I am supporting KP Price. I've just pitched in $100, and I'd love you to join me. Even $10 make a difference. Let's show KP the love and keep him connected to our school. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets your team up for success. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaways to take tickets to a game in November. Just download Roy, create an account, and enter referral code Locked On and you're entered. Already on Roy, and any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Download Roy today and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. Be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return on you for more info. Roy, support the players, change the game. Welcome back. This is Locked On Boston College, AJ Black. Thank you all for listening to our show today. On Thursday's show, I will be going live after the game on the Locked On Boston Postcast channel. Make sure you subscribe to that. We'll be going live talking about the game in Blacksburg. But we're recapping the first 6 weeks with Parker Fleming of Stats of War. And Mitch, what was the next thing you wanted to bring up?
So something I want to talk about is turnover luck, which I think some people, if you're coming from looking at football from a more traditional mindset, you're like, oh, just force more turnovers and that's good for you. It's like, well, turnovers, especially in college where the offenses are a little more extreme and unpredictable, they can be pretty fluky. And especially with BC in this last game, they had some kind of fluky turnovers. And on defense, they were very good at forcing turnovers up until this game where they ironically didn't get any against a player like Anthony Calandre. So, Parker, I wanted to ask you, could you kind of explain turnover luck a little more? And then I guess my question with BC is, even though turnover luck is quote unquote fluky, is one game with 0 turnovers more or less fluky than 5 games with multiple turnovers?
Yeah, so
Or
definitely
maybe
gonna, definitely want to say more sample size means I trust it more. Just generally with stats, and kind of on first principles there. I will say shout out to Bill Conley who has his formula that's half of forced fumbles and half of pass breakups and interceptions, and kind of gives us some guidelines for some of that. I think that when you're talking about turnover luck, it's important to remember what random means. So a coin flip is random, right? But I still have a good idea that it's 50-50 heads or tail. If that coin flip was 75-25, it was a weighted coin, it would still be random, but I would expect it to be heads more often. And so we can acknowledge there's a lot of noise and kind of, quote unquote flukiness in turnovers, but we can also acknowledge there are some sustainable metrics that really make us think about who's creating opportunities for turnovers. So I look at, for instance, Thomas Castellanos, and kind of in concert with the rest of the ACC, you think about turnover worthy play rate. He is number 1 in the conference in 5.6% of his passes have been deemed turnover worthy by the charters at PFF. And that means what it means. But I think that's especially disconcerting just from a turnover sustainability standpoint. He only has 100 attempts, which is fewest for a starter besides Grayson McCall, who's of course injured there. So they are, when they do throw it deep. It's higher risk balls. It's more balls in conflict and contested targets. And so that certainly leads to a more the higher variance in the outcomes as he's throwing those down the field. He's at average depth of target, I think, over 10 yards. And then you go and look at the other side of the ball because fumbles, I do believe, are much more random, right? Fumbles are a lot more of, ball comes out, it bounces around. Do you get it? Do you not? Whereas the passing game, for instance, Amari Jackson has 4 pass breakups. Davion Crouch has 3. And I think those are a lot more associated with kind of creating the havoc necessary to create opportunities for turnovers there. And so one game with 0 turnovers isn't going to be, the absolute worst thing in the world. If you look at Amari Jackson's game log, I do believe that he had a pass breakup. Yeah, he had a pass breakup in that game against Virginia. And so not that those are 1-to-1 equated, but like he still was creating that turnover worthy havoc and kind of being disruptive, even if they didn't get the bounces, even if he wasn't in position to make that there. So I wouldn't sound any alarms about turnover sustainability. I try to keep it more between the navigational beacons of, what are the replicable aspects of that performance? And then also, is my team living or dying on turnovers? Are we only scoring touchdowns after turnovers on short fields? That's something that I'm more worried about than necessarily the sustainability of turnovers because, speaking to them being random, you can't really build a house on the sand. You need to build it on the foundations of moving the ball in the everyday business of football. And there's plenty of college football teams that start the season. There's high variance. They get a lot of turnovers. They play better opponents in conference play. Those turnovers dry up and then they're kind of exposed. That's what I'd be worried about for Boston College is more so, can they continue to do the things to create turnovers? Or are they going to have to figure out ways to move the ball without those short fields, without that disruption on defense?
Right. And I think that the Castellanos side is interesting because I don't know if you watched their game against Virginia, but his two of his 3 turnovers towards the end. The first was pass gets batted at the line right into the arms of a defender, picked off at the 50. Second one is he's scrambling. The ball, he cocks back and the ball just kind of flies backwards out of his hand. And then then it's bouncing off multiple players. It bounces off the back of a guy's knee brace and they return it for a touchdown. Yep. So, and these happen on consecutive drives. Yes. Yeah. So people are like, oh my God, how do they lose this game? It's like, well, 2 crazy things happen. So, and again, you can't control for those.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on the Boston College podcast, but like Virginia has a very fun quarterback too. Like Castellanos and
Yeah,
Colandrea, like pound for pound in terms of, hey, this is actual college football nonsense. Both of those guys are super high on the chart. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. That's why I was honestly happy that last year they played Musket, because I was like, man, if they play Calandria, then it could go really well for us, but it also could go bad. And then this year, when he's actually seemingly playing a lot more consistent, he's not doing as many silly things. It took them a while, but they finally came back and won that game. And then on defense, so the thing is, there's Amari Jackson got hurt in like the first play of the second half against Virginia. So I think, and we're not really sure exactly what's going on there, but that might be a long term injury. We'll see. But it's also because over the last few years, BC was this super man heavy team, like cover one at an insane rate. And now they're switching to it. They're much higher zone coverage, a lot more of middle field open coverages, which some people are deeming as conservative and soft. But in terms of like the success rate and everything on defense, like all the numbers are like success rate, EPA, are all significantly better than they were last year. Like I'm going to be using True Media's numbers, so not yours, but I'm just comparing them to last year. So last year, BC's defensive success rate was 56.9%, which is 93rd, and their defensive EPA per play was negative 0.13, which is 121st. Now they are 65.2 defensive success rate, which is 10th, and 0.14 defensive EPA per play, which is 15th. So, and again, they played Duquesne. They played a inept Florida State team. But they've also played like, Missouri team that's good, and Missouri didn't, blow them out by any means. Western Kentucky's got a decent group of five offense. Michigan State, they played in a monsoon, so it's a little hard to tell. And then, Virginia, it seems like Virginia is not the pushover we thought. So kind of a similar question there. Like these numbers are probably, I was saying this on the other episode last week, where I'm saying the numbers are significantly better than last year. They're probably going to regress in the coming weeks when they play more conference opponents, but it's because they're starting out so good. They're not going to be as bad as they were at the end of last year.
I think that's absolutely true. I have them, opponent adjusted metrics with a little bit of priors, and those priors with a team like Boston College is going to assume some regression to the mean in a positive sense. Hey, you're not going to be that bad with, a new coach and some returning production. I have them at 48th right now in EPA per play on defense. And they weren't a Power 5 defense last year, just frankly. And this year they legitimately are. They're on the bottom side of that, but that's progress for Boston College, right? We're building up the foundation and moving there. And in the run game, I think they've been really, really good. They're 34th overall, 67th against the drop back. Some of that is going to be issues with scramble zone, for instance. So I'll mess you up a little bit there. But one thing that's interesting to look at, they're 54th in rush rate over expected against. So accounting for down distance game state and where you are in the field. I like to say, how often are teams rushing against you relative to what an average team is doing? And there's no obvious tendency. That's the hallmark of kind of a bad or fragile defense, is that one side will be really good, like their rush EPA will be really good, and their pass EPA will be really bad. But their rush rate over expected is tiny because teams are just passing against them because they can. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't look like opponents with that rush rate over expected are exploiting an obvious weakness in the Boston College defense. They are a relatively balanced unit, even as they're outplaying their pass game and the run game. The pass defense certainly needs some help and needs some improvement, but it looks like they're not being taken advantage of, which again is a step. They are a legitimate defense that you have to scheme an offense against. You can't just come in and do whatever you want against them, and that's progress.
All right, we're going to wrap things up with Parker Fleming in just a moment. We'll be right back. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live by play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. There was some great Monday Night Football action up on FanDuel. I got in on the over-under of 40.5, and right now at halftime, it's 37 points, I believe. So feeling pretty good about tonight's bet here against the Jets and Bills. I think Aaron Rodgers just threw a Hail Mary to end the half. So you, if you want to get yourself started, can start with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Locked on Boston College, AJ Black, wrapping things up here on our Tuesday show. I hope you guys all had a great long weekend if you had one. Thank you all who have locked on here and followed us on Twitter, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We're wrapping things up here with Parker Fleming and Mitch. What other things did you want to talk about special teams, which I know has been a hot button topic with Boston College fans? Is punting has been for a while, at least the beginning of the year was a giant mess. It's starting to even out a little bit, but I'll let you take the floor again.
Yeah, so even though Ivan Zavenko has quote unquote stabilized the position, BC is still 131st in yards per punt, 124th in net yards per punt. But they're doing pretty decent in opponent average starting field position on punts at their own 27.1, which is 81st. So not great, but better. And Parker, I wanted to ask you something, and it goes with special teams, but it also goes with something with the defense, is that I've tried to explain that where a drive starts is huge for the defense, because if they're defending a short field at like the 35, at their own 30, at the offense's 35 and going in, it's very hard to defend a shorter field like that. Now, with punting, it has improved as of late, but it's still a problem, and BC hasn't had to attempt a ton of punts from deep in their own territory, so that's also helped. But I'm curious as to if you could kind of explain why this starting field position thing is so important.
Yes. Okay. Are you guys ready to get really dumb about statistics? This is the stupidest thing. This is my dumbest weird idea, but I think it's a really useful heuristic, because it's great. I have a model. It's machine learning. It takes the history of data and says, here's where they started, here's the opponent, all this stuff, and comes up with expected points. Here's how you can just think of this simply in football terms. Football's like bowling. Your opponent's going to get about 10 possessions. You're going to get about 10 possessions. If you start at the 25, on average, that's about 2.5 points per drive, right? Just completely average. Just take those benchmark numbers. That's 25 to 25. That's how the game starts, right? And then you're adding or subtracting points based on field position and what you do with those drives, right? That's not a super well calibrated expected points model, but it is a good frame of reference. So you can start at 2.5 points per drive at the 25, right? If first and 10 at the 25, that's what we're expecting for most teams. Take a half point or add a half point for every 5-yard difference there, right? And so that's kind of a good mental model to start to think about. There's a fixed number of points per drive, and as you move field position, you dramatically change that. So you start doing the math on that. If you start at your own 50, we're talking that you're scoring, 4.5 points per drive. Or if you're starting at your own, or 5 points per drive, if you're starting at your own 0, you're not scoring any points per drive, right? And so there can be huge swings based on that field position. I think that's absolutely underrated. Not to mention, just in a probabilistic sense, that hot take here, it's harder to score farther away because you have to run more plays. And yes, you get more opportunities for explosives, but also you have to keep moving the chains, and that gets harder as you sequence. It's harder to put together 12 plays than it is to put together 6 plays.
There's a reason why offensive success rates are all 40%. It's not
exactly. And so field position,
the house always wins.
Exactly. So field position, I think, is really, really huge. And that's a marker I like to look at. There's some teams that stand out. I always point at this because I used to cover TCU. Baylor in 2021, I think something like it was an absurd number. It was more than 50% of their scoring drives, of all of their drives, started in opponent territory, and 80% of their scoring drives were starting in opponent territory. They didn't have a good offense, but their defense was so good at generating those turnovers, getting those field position, that it just completely propped up their offense. So you want to keep that in mind as well. Boston College is 41st in starting field position on offense. 28.8 is what I have that at. I throw out FCS data because it's a little too noisy. On defense, they are allowing opponents to start at the 26.5. That's 33rd overall. So generally, they're doing themselves some favors on offense, and some of that is the defense getting some of those turnovers and giving you better field position. And then on defense, they're not making these obvious huge gains in the aggregate. I think the punting issue that you raised is absolutely a problem. Although, of course, net yards per punt is a little complicated because of field position and touchbacks and everything. But a good broad brush.
The new punter, I think he's only punted 16 times, but 25% of his punts have landed inside the 10. So because they're kind of near midfield, but also because BC doesn't trust their field goal kicker, a lot of the times they are punting from plus territory, which angers me, but I get why they have to do it.
Which is an extremely analytical way to think about it, is we have the number and then we can add some context to it there. But so I'd say, again, that kind of half a point for 5 yards from a touchback is a really good, broad brush framework that every fan can start to think about there. And Boston College is not amazing. They're 2.3 net field position. That's 31st. That's middle of the pack for Power Four. But they're also the upshot of that, and what you want out of a well-coached team that's kind of building and improving as they go is they're not leaving huge point gains on the field by creating these special teams mishaps or anything. So even if it could be better, it's not obviously hampering them or setting up opposing offenses to score.
Yeah, that kind of goes with something else, which I want to ask you about. But like again, the punting itself has been bad, but kick coverage on both units has been very good. They're also BC went from. Let me see. If I can find the stat really quick? Last year they were 104th in penalties per game, 90th in penalty yards per game, also 127th in offensive penalty EPA per game at negative 1.28. This year they're sixth in penalties per game, 3.83, and ninth in penalty yards per game, 33.83. So, going from one of the worst, probably the worst Power Five team in terms of penalties to one of the best, especially in special teams, that makes a huge difference as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, not even accounting for, hey, a pass interference on third down gives you a new first down, just 15 yards right there. Using that simple, half a point for 5 yards, that's a 1.5 point swing. You add that up over the course of a season, and that's dramatically altering your expected points total and dramatically altering the course of the game. So controlling that is great. Simple things like 2/3 of their kickoffs have not been returned. I think that's great. Make them, let's eliminate the variance and kind of keep them in longer fields. I think they've done a really good job with that as well.
All right. I think we're out of time, Mitch. Any last questions before we wrap things up? Or
no, I think that's it for me. Parker, thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure everybody says this, but I love the new website. Love the dashboards that you're putting together for every matchup. Really helps contextualize things, makes it easy to digest. Obviously, a nice little color scale goes a long way with data viz. So I appreciate that. You're at Stats of War on Twitter, but let everybody know where they can find the rest of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for saying that. Shout out to developer Nick and the guys over at NCAA Insiders who've helped me do way less work this year and getting those previews up, which is really, really great and lets me focus on the football.
More time to not watch the games.
Exactly. Yeah, but you can find me at Stats of War on Twitter. NCAA Insiders is where CFB Graphs lives right now. We've got some leaderboards and stuff there. And check it out. If you're into some of the gambling stuff, we don't only focus on gambling. We do talk mostly football, but the BetUS college football show is on Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 1:00 Eastern on YouTube. Just BetUS college football on YouTube. You'll find us. Come check us out there. It's a lot of fun.
All right, Parker Fleming, thank you for coming on. Mitch, where can people find you?
You can find me at Mitchell T. Wolf, WOLFE on Twitter. Finally got our big stats review posted. We're still waiting on True Media to update their coverage data, which I guess I have to email them again tomorrow. And we'll obviously have stuff from Virginia Tech coming out fast and furious in the next few days. Getting ready for the game on Thursday.
All right, and we'll be back tomorrow for another episode. Mitch will be back on with me on Wednesday to give our preview. Thank you all for listening. Follow me on Twitter at AJBlack247 for Mitch and Parker. Thank you all. We'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.